H-A-T. It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast. We are back again with Jason Helton. He is the media outreach minister from Madison Church of Christ. We want to make sure that we say, as we go into this conversation, we'll be handling some adult topics. We'll get right to that conversation after these important messages. This episode of the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast is presented by Faulkner University. Faulkner University is a private Christian liberal arts university based in Montgomery, Alabama, with a mission to provide an education anchored by not only intellect, but also character and service. The Faulkner experience aims to educate the whole person. Every individual matters every day. We all want to become better versions of ourselves. No one wants to remain trapped where they are because of missed opportunities and unrealized dreams. At Faulkner University, we believe your dreams don't have an expiration date. We understand that you're looking for more than a degree. You want to find your niche and thrive in your career. Whether you're a high school senior just beginning your trek or an adult student looking for a better path, Faulkner is here to help guide your journey. Go to faulkner.edu to apply or get more info. That's faulkner.edu. I'm Travis Creasy. That's all-pro counselor with Three Chord Counseling in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Ben Hayes, how are you today?
Doing good. Enjoying the conversation with Jason and what we've already got to talk to him about. That was on a previous episode. Looking forward to this next conversation that I know is going to be heavy, but it's going to be awesome. And so looking forward to that. But before we do that, Will, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Just hoping that Emmy will stay, 5 for the rest of her life after hearing everything that Jason's been talking about. And glad I don't have a teenager right now, but with what he keeps saying, technology is going to keep rolling. So guess we got to start figuring out all the fixes and solutions. So just been good to have him. Jason, thanks for joining us again, man.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Thanks again for the invite. And spoiler alert, God said he'd never give us a temptation that we wouldn't have a way out of that would overtake us. So there is definitely hope there. And I think we're all uniquely equipped to navigate this particular age and time. So hang in there, man. You got it.
So, Jason, we've talked about, and I think most people that have grown up in the church, we were told what not to do, right? And who not to do it with. But we don't necessarily always get the why. And I think it's really interesting. It shouldn't be shocking that data has proven and science itself has proven what the Bible and God, of course, set in motion many, many moons ago about us and how we're built. And so I guess the quickest way to ask the question is, what are some ways that technology has impacted us sexually? I think that there is some lineup there, and we've always heard, don't do this and don't do it with this person. And maybe that was communicated that sex is bad in itself. And, we almost take the spirituality out of it ourselves. And then, of course, the world steps into that vacuum. And so what are some ways in which they've done that?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head, in my opinion. I think, at least in our generation, growing up, what I heard the most, and anytime I speak on this, I get people come up afterwards like, yes, absolutely. That's exactly the way I feel. And it was taught to us, don't have sex outside of marriage, specifically don't have sex before marriage. And as you're a teenager, you hear that over and over again. And it turns into sex is bad outside of marriage. And that turns into sex is bad. And so then you have a generation of folks that at 8 a.m. on their wedding day, sex is bad. 8 p.m. after their wedding ceremony, now sex is good. And it's supposed to be this vital part of your relationship. Go figure it out. And that's just not the way it works. It's not a flipping of a switch at all. I think it's interesting. I polled our class at Madison. We had about 111 that took the survey. And recently at a church in Middle Tennessee that I'll be doing a workshop for here in a couple of weeks, gave them a similar poll. At Madison, the stats were really interesting. When I broke down the generations, I asked the question of, did you have any kind of conversation? Did your parents have a conversation with you about sex growing up or sexuality? And about 50% of the millennials said no. 50% said yes. 50% of Gen X and Gen Z said about the same thing. But the boomers, 75%, almost 80% really, said that their parents had never told them anything about sex or sexuality. And excuse me, this is the age group that grew up in the sexual revolution of the 60s, right? My dad's a boomer. He was born in 1950. So he was a teenager in the midst of Woodstock and all the stereotypical 60s lifestyle. That's the group that then also raised the millennials. So the sexual revolution that started in the 60s, it went from a very communal 60s vibe to the 70s was a very personal me and we. And interesting, Google has a database where you can search word trends over time. And in the 70s, the trend from us and we moved to me and I. So self-help started in the 70s and 80s. Self-help books became a genre during that time. Sexual exploration became a big thing. And it was really unhindered until the 80s and 90s when the AIDS epidemic hit. That's when free love hit a speed bump. The pill was created in the mid 60s and made popular and normalized in the mid 60s. That changed the trajectory, and that really kind of helped produce the sexual revolution. Well, we just recently had this past year where the pill is now accessible. The birth control pill is accessible even without a prescription. So technologies have all along the way have kind of helped curate this this sexual revolution that then merged with the digital revolution in the early 2000s. And 90s even, where now pornography is accessible at just an unbelievable rate. There was one study that I read about for 14-year-old boys in Italy were reporting erectile dysfunction and other sexual performance challenges. 14, I mean, that's ninth graders. That's the height of hormones are raging like crazy, right? And these 14-year-olds are they're asexual and reported actual erectile dysfunction. I mean, that for there to be any kind of a reportable number or percentage, that's remarkable in the worst way possible. I had a conversation recently with a friend of mine in his 60s, and we're talking about, what are some of the challenges of emerging generations? And he said, well, I think they can't build stuff, they can't fix stuff. They have a general working knowledge of nothing. And I said, well, one that's a little judgy, but also kind of accurate. But I think the biggest thing is the sexual stuff. I don't think it's that big a deal. We had Playboy and pornography. We had magazines, and that's when I realized he didn't get it. The way the brain works is it maps things that you have. Basically, you're creating an interstate system in your brain. The first time you walk through the woods and there's no trail there, there's no evidence you were there. But if you walked that path in the woods over and over again, you would create a walking path, an actual trail. There would be evidence. Well, that's what happens when you have experience in your brain. It maps that experience. And the more you have that experience in a repeated behavior, repeated pattern, it creates a wider path, so to speak. So then you start to filter things through that same line of thinking. So for instance, if you started watching pornography at a young age of 9 or 10 years old, well, by the time you're 14 or 15 years old, that's how you think. Billie Eilish actually had an interview a while back, I think it was a year or two ago, with Howard Stern on his show. And she said that I hate pornography, which is interesting. This is a person who is in the center, like one of the biggest stars in the world, and not necessarily, again, a spiritually minded person, and not promoting God per se. But she said, I encountered pornography at a really young age, like single digits. And she said, for years, I just consumed a lot of pornography, and I thought it was cool. I was one of the guys. And then when I started becoming sexually active, I was in the midst of really violent, awful things that no child should certainly ever see, let alone no adult should ever see, let alone a child. She said, so when I started being sexually active, I assumed that's the way it was supposed to happen. So it was horribly damaging and painful and just awful. Like she said, I hate it to this day. And that's one reason why you notice her clothes, she's not sexually provocative at all in what she wears. And it's partly because of that. She's been quoted as saying that as well. So I think one thing parents really need to do a better job of is understanding how our bodies work and explaining and being honest and open with our kids about that. There are two particular hormones in the brain that are released at a really large rates in sexually intimate moments. And that is oxytocin and vasopressin. And they're prevalent in both the male and female, but in the female, oxytocin is more prevalent. And there are three particular times in a woman's life in a female's life when oxytocin is at its highest: sexual climax, giving birth, and feeding a child, nursing a child. And when you think about it, those are 3 moments of deep, intimate, very strong bonding moments.
Yeah.
When you say don't have sex, you say don't eat the cookie. Well, what do I want? I want to eat the cookie. You're focusing on the action. And that's where we went wrong. These hormones that are being released in the brain, they actually attach you to that person. So for the male, when vasopressin floods the brain, your olfactory senses are really heightened. So the perfume, that the girl wears, that sticks and that actually wires into your brain. So when someone has a sexually intimate moment, and this is true even for kissing and holding hands, but the more intimate you are, then the deeper that bond becomes. The analogy that I found that I think is the best I've heard is like a piece of Scotch tape. If I take a piece of tape and I put it on a piece of paper, that initial bond is going to be very strong. And if I press down real hard, firmly, and it's going to stay. If I go to take that tape off of the paper, it's going to cause some damage. It's going to rip the paper off. And then if I try to reuse that tape, every time I reuse the tape, it's going to become more difficult for me to have a deep bond. And that's what happens in the brain is the more we have frequent partners, the more we trigger that not just the dopamine in our brains, but those 2 hormones, the more challenging it becomes to have a deep connection and deep bond with someone.
So that bonding that you're talking about that happens when those chemicals are released, those hormones are released, that happens too with pornography. Just
exactly.
And you're bonding to someone you've never actually met, to an experience or a person or a thing, in that case.
If you think about it, you're actually just bonding to pixels.
Right.
It triggers that. And so if you think about it that way, that's weird. Hopefully that if someone's struggling with this, think of it as being that weird, and that'll help, I'm not going to do that. But you're exactly right. So the dopamine is a part of your reward circuitry in your brain. And you probably know more about this than I do, but you know how this works then. Dopamine is released, but dopamine, it gets credit for being this pleasure molecule, but it's not. It's the molecule of more, which is a book out right now as well that I would recommend to better understand this. It keeps you craving for things. Your brain loves novelty, which means it likes new experiences. It likes things that are different. So when you go to YouTube and you're watching a video, somebody sends you a link, what's over there on the column, the right side of every video? It's a list of suggested videos, right? And if you click on one of those, there's going to be another list of suggested videos, and there's going to be another over and over. There's this unlimited novelty that just keeps curating. And the way algorithms work, they're going to give you something they know you like, but then they're also going to start throwing in some random things that they think you might like. And when it comes to pornography, that's a horrible recipe. For older men in particular, this doesn't impact exclusively men. In fact, the data is saying that the trends are rising for women as well. But it is more impactful generally for men. For girls, social media, the comparison stuff, that is the highest of the highs. For guys, it's the sexual stuff and video games as well, the addictive nature there. But for what we're talking about, when a guy's, let's say he's pursuing pornography and there's something random pops up on the side and clicks that link, it's going to continue to evolve. And that's how people go from they watch someone kissing to now they look up and they're watching really weird or really graphic, dangerous things. Reports in violent sex acts among adolescents are also on the rise. And that to me, it's not just a correlation, it's causation. Pornography absolutely cultivates that in us. And so then let's say you spend a lot of time looking at those things, you go back to just regular social media, you may not be watching actual people having the act of sex, but you're cultivating lustful content. And so the way our brains work, they're connected to our hearts. And the Bible says that Jesus said that the eye is the lamp of the body. So if the things you look at are light, then there will be light. But if you look at darkness, then your heart will also become dark. And so from a sexual standpoint, we just missed the boat on teaching. When we say don't have sex, we never, like you said, Travis, we never said why. If you look at 1 Corinthians 5, 6, and 7, you have, I think, a really good glimpse into the why. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, I see the pilot episode of Jerry Springer Show, right? It's a man has his father's wife sexually. That's, the church said, ew, all right? That's gross. It's either his mother or his stepmother, either way. If you get to chapter 6, Paul writes that the body, Paul says that, the food is for the body and body for food. Like, because I can, I should, basically, because I know, no, your body is for God, to glorify God in your body. Chapter 7, he gets to husband and wife relationship. He said, husbands, your body is not your own. It is your wife's. Wives, your body is not your own, is for your husbands. So what was never explained in any context in the church or in high school anatomy class was, one, sex is most fulfilling when your partner is absolutely giving of themselves and trying to please you, and when you are doing the same to try and please them. It's not about consuming sex. It's not about my gratification. It's about me pleasing my wife, my wife pleasing me. That's very, very different than don't have sex before you get married, right? How many marriages could be saved? How many marriages could be, at a minimum, vastly improved? What if our sex life was the best part of our marriage? Like that would, I think, absolutely change the church.
The mission of Heritage Christian University is simple. They aim to advance the churches of Christ by equipping servants through undergraduate and graduate programs. HCU produces effective communicators of the gospel, focusing on evangelism and a commitment to Scripture. Heritage Christian University offers 5 degrees: Associate of Arts in Biblical Studies, Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Studies, Master of Arts, Master of Ministry, and Master of Divinity. HCU is accredited by the Association for Biblical Higher Education and is an associate member of the Association of Theological Schools. Since 1968, Heritage Christian University has offered affordable degrees in biblical studies, allowing graduates to thrive in their ministries without the burden of loan debt. In fact, most graduates finish at HCU without owing anything for their education. For the spring 2024 semester, HCU is offering full tuition scholarships for the graduate level students. For more information about the scholarships they offer, visit www.hcu.edu. HCU invites you to the 2024 Heritage event at the Marriott Shoals Conference Center. Join them on Saturday, August 24th for an incredible night of music from the legendary Ricky Skaggs and Kentucky Thunder. General admission tickets and table sponsorships are available for purchase. Visit hcu.edu to purchase your tickets today. If you think HCU is the perfect university for you, visit hcu.edu to schedule a tour or apply today. Heritage Christian University helps you thrive in your ministry. We build in an excuse. I've had conversations with teenagers, and well, which one's worse, right? At least I'm not doing it with someone I'm not married to, right? It's in the privacy of my own home. It's just what I'm watching. Well, when we go into the why and we explain it from that standpoint, you see why it is. I tend to believe that all sin in God's eyes is equal. We have degrees. We have manslaughter. We have all this. But nonetheless, I think it builds in an excuse.
It's the victimless crime. So it's victimless sin, but it's not. And the reality is, one, you're helping support an industry that traffics children, right? That destroys lives. If you've ever, fightthenewdrug.org is a great resource. They also have a podcast, and they've had several folks on there that were coerced into the adult industry. Some of them went into the adult industry knowingly, but several girls and guys that have tried to get out of that industry. And you hear them talk about how they get their video removed from one of the big sites, like one of the big ones, and then all of a sudden it pops up on 50 more. It's like whack-a-mole. They'll never, because it's digital, because it's out there, they'll never be able to fully get those videos of them removed. So it's not victimless. It's also not victimless. Let's say it's a teenage boy that's not married. Well, I'm not, having an affair with my wife. Well, one, you're training your heart to be unfaithful. You're also training your brain to be aroused by someone who is not your wife and someone who is likely to never be your wife. Every investment of every second into pornography and not just pornography, but lustful content is an investment in the destruction and deterioration of your marriage. And I don't know any other way to put it. I don't ever plan to get married. Okay, well, every time you invest in this, you're separating yourself from God. I had a young man that I'd known for many, many years, and he and his wife were going through a really tough time and likely headed for divorce. And I said, well, how prevalent is lust in your life, like pornography and stuff? He said, it was a little bit, it used to be. First he said no. I said, come on. And he said, okay, so it was, but I don't think it really impacted our marriage. That's the most ignorant, like lack of knowledge statement I've ever heard, and heartbreaking, because you think that you can watch someone else participate in the most vulnerable and intimate action you can have with another person, and you think that won't impact your wife, the person who you're supposed to have this level of intimacy with. And that's the thing, is saying don't have this, or focusing on the act, is we take away the vulnerability, the innocence. Sex is actually really challenging for most people because it involves complete transparency. We're not usually good at that right out of the box, right out of the gate. It's not something that we as people do, even in the church. We kind of, we put on our coat and tie and we cinch it up, and we let people in to a degree we're comfortable with. But when it comes to sexual intimacy, your clothes are not on. Like, that's the most vulnerable you can be in a physical state. But then it also involves, again, the pleasure of the other person, learning the other person, giving of yourself. Like, that is a very Christ-like act, to give of yourself. It's exactly what he did for us, spiritually speaking. So it's, when you look at it from that standpoint, to your point, Travis, that's a great point to bring up. Like, it's in no way victimless. First of all, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians that this is a unique sin. Sexual sin is different. All sin to God is wrong, and it separates us from him. But sexual sin is different in the way that it impacts us. And I got to think that God had some of the neurological stuff in mind as well when he wrote that, or had that written through Paul, to know that there's things that are happening and forming in us that we don't see on the surface, and to say, well, I just watch this. What you watch impacts you greatly. Like, there's just no question about it. Science says that. God says that. That is a fact on every level. And so to consume something in a way, in the context that God did not intend it, it's only going to be detrimental to us. Sex is a great thing. It's the way he chose to populate the world, but he intended it for a context, to be right and to be holy and to be fulfilling. And when we have it outside of that, we participate outside of that, just like anything we do outside of the context he originally intended, there's going to be brokenness and difficulty and challenge and hurt.
Well, when we talk about sex too, especially with pornography, we're talking about selfishness, and like, that's at the core of almost every sin, is a level of selfishness. And so you talked about that a little bit, the self-gratification and the selfishness, that's involved in that. And something else that you mentioned earlier that I think we've shared before, but from the Covenant Eyes platform and some of the things that they talk about there, they talk about how, pornography kind of stands on accessibility, affordability, and anonymity, that nobody knows about it. It's affordable and it's accessible. And you were talking about the guy earlier saying, well, we had Playboys and we had, different things that we could look at. Yeah, but you had to go somewhere to get that. You had to pay for it. You had to, you had to sneak around so that nobody else knew about it. And so, those things have been kind of taken away. And now your kids have these phones, these tablets, these computers that it's accessible, it's affordable, and it's anonymous. And so, the only way to really kick that out from under it is, to the accountability part of it is having somebody to help keep you accountable. And I think what, you're encouraging is obviously parents being a part of that. But, as people get to be in adulthood, that's not who that's going to be. And so finding someone trusted that you can, that can help you with it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a group of guys that I go to lunch with some regularity, and for this conversation, and we say we're getting together to eat, to be together, but for accountability and encouragement. And this is something that we've done for a long time now. But I've kind of had that group, not that specific group of guys, but in college there was a group of guys that did the same thing. As you continue to grow, you do need to have that accountability. You need to have relationships that have that kind of depth to where you can confess that kind of sin. And that's one thing that sometimes we don't cultivate in our congregations, is an openness to sin. We kind of have this is where right people come, instead of this is where people come to get right, and I think the humility that is a part of the culture of our church makes a big impact. But some of this is just from ignorance, because older generations didn't know. We didn't know. We're getting the research now over the last decade or so. And so to some degree, I don't fault my parents or their generation of parents, because we do spend a lot of time talking about raising a new generation of teenagers, and we don't spend as much time talking about raising a new generation of parents, because we say, well, all sins are the same, and they don't raise their kids to have the same work ethic. Well, life is totally different. They don't have to. It's things that had to be done manually are now done automatically and automated. So that's where technology, again, Satan's super crafty, and anything that can be used for good he can use for evil and manipulate it. He has taken one of the most sacred parts of our relationship to each other, a man and a wife, and he has completely made a mockery. He's made it a consumer item. He's made it to where it's not a big deal. Even in high school, I remember Girls Gone Wild was the big thing, right? And it just kind of normalized everything, and we're like, oh yeah, it's no big deal. Everybody's seen that. It's like, well, that's not. No, that shouldn't be the case. Normal. No, we use the word normal. That's just that's frequency. That's not holy or unholy, right or wrong. Abuse can be normal in someone's home. Doesn't mean it's a good thing. It just means it happens frequently. So we got to make sure that we don't allow sin to ever be normalized in our lives, in our congregations, or in our families, because then Satan will use these technologies to just, exponentially, like you said earlier, with a magazine, you probably had to wait a month or at least weeks. You had to wait some kind of delayed time to access that. But now a 14-year-old can access more sexually explicit content in 1 hour of online viewing than his dad did, his entire life. Yeah. And it's just remarkable. When high-speed internet changed, it changed a lot of things. And this is one of those that we've been in a porn pandemic exponentially longer than we've been in the COVID pandemic. And I think it's done exponential damage, more so than anything else as well. Because if the detriment to families, the detriment to marriages, the detriment to teenagers. It impacts sleep. It impacts your just the addictive nature of your brain. It hijacks and wires Jason, everything. And
you mentioned the girls, the rise in girls, and when I was a teenager, much of my not having sex was because I dated girls who were just not going to let that happen, right? They weren't going to. I dated them. I didn't think it was going to be an issue. It wasn't because I was holy and I was trying to be all, close to God by any means. It was just that was not going to happen. And so I really mourn for the dating life period, because we're in my experience, we're seeing even, I teach at a private school, not that I've had any experience or anything, but like I'm seeing where the girls are more and more like boys, as in, sexual, they see it as a way as kind of not trapping the boys, but that's what they want. And so
they're more aggressive.
Yes. I would have never made it. I would have never survived. I'm not like Joseph, how could I do this terrible thing against God? It was, man, my mom will kill me if I did this, or, so, and I just don't even know how to deal with that. Like, I don't know.
Well, even as a youth minister, like spring break, I hate looking at Instagram, because girls go to the beach and they post their beach pictures and stuff. And let me also take a little bit of a rabbit here. I think we're hearing and seeing a lot of the purity culture of the 90s that did a really good job of putting the weight of sexual rightness squarely on the shoulders of exclusively the girls in a really unfair way. And that has done as much damage as anything. This is absolutely everyone's responsibility. Guys, 1000%. We have to do everything we can to take responsibility, to acknowledge where weaknesses are. And that's why you got to delete apps sometimes, because it's I think the pressure on the girls is to look a certain way and to kind of curate their feed a certain way. The rise in sending nudes to one another, the huge rise in OnlyFans. And how many, if you just in the last 2 years, the number of teachers that have been arrested or lost their job because their OnlyFans account got really successful. This is not, it's not good at all. But the rationale out there does not take into account the spiritual damage that's done. In fact, I listened to a podcast a while back, and it was talking about AI robots and sex robots, and it was weird. It was a Preston Sprinkle conversation where he had somebody that was talking about this topic, and he said, there is a logic out there. There's a line of thinking that says that sex robots are helpful to society because they can be used by the sexually broken and dysfunctional, and then those folks have a place to go that's not in normal society. And he said, that's an Augustine mindset. Augustine wrote in Confessions that brothels were beneficial to society because the sexually broken had a place to go. And you talk about using brokenness to solve brokenness. That's just not what heals that issue. Yeah. But it's all over. And you're right. The pressure on girls is completely like overwhelming. I mean, just overwhelming, because sexual things definitely sell and they become more popular. And so there's the image of the girl that is popular or the influence out there, and the comparison that comes with that. There's also, again, this cultivated, kind of goes back to Billie Eilish, where she was one of the guys. The aggressiveness, I think, is a part of that culture as well that stemmed from it. And it's utterly heartbreaking. So having a son or a daughter, it's really daunting right now. If you don't have kids, like those of us that do, we need your prayers, because it's a lot, and it comes from a bunch of different angles, all the time. And that's one reason why I'm having not just social media. It's not just the content to me. It's the device itself is addictive. That's why your notifications are little red dots, because red, it goes to your brain differently. That's why all the stop signs are red. If they were blue, we'd have a lot more accidents in town and stuff. So the devices, the access to devices has to be later in life, when we have more ability to discern and to make better choices and decisions. Because especially teenagers' brains and adolescents, like the brain is, it will absolutely crave addictive behaviors. That is when children are ripe for addictive behaviors. And these technology folks, they know that. And so they've leveraged it to be successful and to make money and to have power and influence. But the sexual side of this is on a whole nother level, because it's not just an addictive behavior, but then it becomes a lifestyle. It becomes a lifestyle of shame. And so we have Christians that are going decades into their life, going into their marriage with this shame. I had a young man that called me. I've never met him before, but he knew a mutual minister friend of mine that we had talked about this topic. And so he called me a couple of weeks ago, and he's been married for less than 4 months and is struggling, and just recently revealed to his wife the depth of his addiction with pornography and lust. And so they were living in different houses less than 6 months into marriage. Like that is heartbreaking. It's destroying marriages, and it's destroying people's view of sex. And so the destruction is out there. It's a problem that the church really, really needs to be more vocal on. And I know these are some words that are on that taboo list of things we don't talk about, but in the church, that list is a lie. It doesn't exist. There's nothing we don't talk about at church. When we don't talk about these things at church, then we never get the opportunity to put them in the spiritual context. And our kids don't have a choice. I mean, they don't have a chance.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com, and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.